Hello everyone! In this video we're going to talk about Chinese landscape painting. So for this, as with our other projects, you will need a piece of paper, some paint, a pencil, and a brush. I will be using a round brush in this video and just a regular old number 2 pencil. I have my paper that I'm doing my project on taped down to the table because anytime you add paint to a piece of paper, there's the potential for the paper to wrinkle. This is just plain printer paper because I want to use paper that you guys probably have lying around. And since that paper is a little bit thinner than regular painting paper, it tends to want to wrinkle, so I have it taped down with just masking tape. And then I have some extra paper to use for practice. So I'll be using watercolor because that's what I have here on my desk. You can use watercolor if you'd like. You can use the paint that was sent to you in your supply box or paint that you already have or bought, whatever you prefer. So on our practice page, I always think it's a good idea to sort of practice making some paint strokes before you get started on your actual project. Chinese calligraphy, landscape painting has a lot of variation in brush strokes, so a lot of thick to thin brush strokes so that you get a really natural looking form in your brush strokes. And so you can achieve that with the amount of pressure that you're applying on your brush. So if you just barely drag the brush along the paper, you get these really nice skinny lines. And then when you start to add more pressure, the lines will get bolder, they'll get thicker. And then with a lot of pressure, you get really big lines, just like that, okay? And then you can kind of taper them off back to nice little skinny detail lines. Also, an important thing to note for this project is that Chinese landscape painting is usually done in shades of gray because they used black sumi ink. So I'll be doing this project in black and white so that we keep that Chinese landscape painting inspiration. And you can do this, you can get these different shades of gray going on by varying the amount of water that you add to your paint. So if you have your black paint, you can add some to a palette. You can use a plate, you can use an actual paint palette, whatever it is that you need or that you have. And then if you add a lot of water, you're going to get a nice gray color like this. And if you have little or no water in your paint, you'll get a dark black like so. Okay, so those are just a few things that you need to know for this project. Okay, so really quickly, I am going to sketch out my project. First thing you want to do is start with the horizon line. Notice how light I'm sketching it because I don't want to be able to see my pencil lines afterwards. And then I'm going to add a few kind of hills going on in the background here. Maybe a hint of a riverbed. I know that this is not showing up on the video very strongly. That's actually good because you want to draw really, really light. And then in the foreground here, the front of the painting, maybe we've got some rocks with a tree. I have to say that this is going to end up looking nothing like the actual part of the world where I live, but I'm taking advantage of the fact that we're doing a landscape inspired by Chinese painting because they have these really cool, really dramatic trees and things. Okay, so in the background, the hills that are furthest away are actually going to be pretty light because of what we call atmospheric perspective. So the further away something gets when we're outside, the more air there is between you and that thing. So the more atmosphere there is, which means that as it goes off into the distance, it gets lighter. And so the really, really far objects are going to be very light. And then as we move toward the foreground, they're going to get a little bit darker. And this is actually kind of a handy thing because it helps you to delineate your foreground, middle ground, and background. You always want to have a foreground, middle ground, and background whenever you're working on something like landscape painting. Okay. Now remember, when we look at Chinese landscape painting, there tends to be a lot of negative space, right? Like a lot of white space. So it's okay to not fill in your entire page with paint. Don't be afraid to kind of give it some room to breathe a little bit. Okay, and then maybe we've got this kind of meandering river coming along from the background up to the foreground. The nice thing about painting like this is that there's no specific way that this has to look, right? I mean, if we're drawing portraits of someone's face, it's got to look pretty much one way, right? Because our brains are really good at recognizing faces, and if there's something off about a drawing or painting of someone's face, your brain's going to recognize it really quickly. But whenever you're drawing nature, the forms are so organic that there's lots of different ways that they can look, and it's still going to end up looking like a landscape. Please excuse my dog barking in the background. I don't know if you guys can hear her. She's not happy about something. Okay. So, got a few of these little brush strokes in here to kind of show where kind of there's some land, right? I'm gonna widen the river a little bit here. Okay, and then in the foreground is where we're gonna have our details. And this is where things are gonna be darker. In fact, it's where you're gonna have your darkest forms because they're so close to the front. And so what I'm doing here is I'm using my brush and applying a lot of pressure so that it really puts down a lot of paint. You can see how flat it's going on the paper. And then I am leaving a little bit of space. I'm not filling it in solidly black because we want to be able to get an idea of the texture of the rock, right? Okay, so then for the tree that I'm gonna have growing out of this rock, I'm gonna apply a good bit of pressure, have kind of a wide stroke that gets narrower as it goes off into space, okay? So this will end up being the trunk of the tree. And this is one of those cool, gnarled old trees that we see a lot in Chinese landscape painting. This is the part that I was talking about where I'm not really painting a landscape that looks like home for me, because where I live, we don't really have trees like this, but they're so cool to paint. So got my branches put on, and now I'm just going to kind of tap the end of my brush, the skinny part of the brush, onto the paper to kind of give a hint of the leaves that are on this tree. Okay. Again, we're painting nature, so it's very organic, it's very loose. There's not one certain way it has to look. But what you don't want to do is make those little broccoli trees that we draw whenever we're little kids, you know? Like 2 straight sticks and then kind of a fluffy shape on top, you know, little cartoon trees. That's what we don't want to do. And then I'm just going to add another kind of rock over here on this side to give it some balance, but this one will maybe be a little bit smaller. And maybe this one's got some sprigs of grass coming up. Okay, just like that. And then now that I'm kind of looking at this, I want to go back and maybe bring the base of this mountain down so that it kind of anchors it a little bit. And maybe just add a few more quick little details in the landscape. Kind of adding in another little rocky outcrop kind of shape here. And there we have it, our Chinese landscape drawing. And all that's left for me to do is sign it. So I'm going to put my signature down here in the bottom. And there we go. Chinese landscape painting. Now remember, whenever you guys take the tape off of your project, peel it to the side just like this. That won't rip your paper. And if you have any paint that comes up to the edge where it was taped, it'll be really satisfying when you pull it off and you get that nice clean border there. Just like that. Okay, enjoy.